if we know anything for sure as humans, it's that we've definitely been wrong in the past. And looking at things differently and thinking about things differently has always been the doorway to furthering progress. But the key is making the connection between the scientific theories and concepts and what we experience. All right, welcome everybody to Spirituality. I am pleased as always to have my good buddy and colleague Joanna back on the show to chit chat with me and have some tea on spiritual topics. And we were talking about getting into some sciencey stuff. Kind of interestingly, both me and her kind of individually have been looking into and reading up on just some of the ways that science is starting to discover and get into some things that sound an awful lot like spirituality, just in different words. Feel free to jump in and comment. As a disclaimer, neither her or I are experts in in scientific fields whatsoever, so it's all speculative on our part and all just based on the things that we've seen and or read about. Sound about right, Joanna?
Sound about right. We're definitely not experts, but I would say we're pretty decently read. I wouldn't even say well read. I've been exploring it most of my life because it's what I see. So to me, cat is more like merging my experiences, right, with this quantum world, and just kind of what I come across, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I got interested in it when I started getting like downloads about stuff that sounded more sciency than it did spiritual, and I started getting into listening on Audible and reading for myself some books about quantum physics and string theory and some of the advanced topics that they're getting into. And I started to feel like a lot of what they're talking about sounds like spiritual concepts that we talk about, that they're just using math to get there instead of like consciousness or feeling, like the kinds of ways that we get to the same conclusions. And so I feel like we're swiftly approaching an era where maybe science and spirituality is actually talking about the same thing.
For me personally, it's I first had the experiences, right? And then I go, what the heck was that? And then I go, let me look that up. I think what you mentioned, Kat, is like the spiritual side of things, we trust our intuition and what we feel and sense in that intuitive world. And then you have the science side, which delves into, like you mentioned, the math and the equations and the kind of logic ish about it, right? And then you have also the psychology of it. It's like, let's say spirituality, science, psychology, they all have their different theories about consciousness. And, you know, we know that it's real, it's true, but it's time for science to kind of merge the two, right?
Yeah, and one of the problems that science has is that the results have to be consistent and replicatable, right? So I think that those of us who roll with a more spiritual track, we're willing to accept our experiences, our personal experiences as data, right? We look at it and go, "No, I experienced this, so I know it's real." But I can't replicate any given result for somebody else. I can't show you the things that I've experienced. I only have anecdotal, basically, evidence to support what I'm saying. Things like string theory, things like M theory. Some of the theories that they're working with in quantum physics sound a lot like a lot of experiences. And I like when the math and the theories that they're coming out with resonate for me, like, like a tarot reading would, or like anything else. I'm like, yeah, that sounds right. It sounds like what I experience. Theoretically, based on the math, there should be a lot more than just the three-dimensional experience that we have, or four dimensions if you count time as one of the dimensions. But as far as they can tell with the math, there should be, I think they said 10, and then they discovered mathematically that there's actually an 11th dimension with M theory. That's like a membrane.
Yeah.
They were talking about like collapsible membranes around the different string.
Yeah.
At least in my experience, astral projecting, there is like a void space, or I guess you could call it a membrane, that you kind of pass through, where it's like a phase of acclimatizing, right? You have to be able to shift consciousness into the next dimension that you're moving into. And I think spirituality has been talking about it for a long time. I mean, we tend to call it different things, different realms, like levels of ascension. Like, we have different words we use to kind of describe a similar concept.
Yeah. Absolutely, Kat. You know, I was watching this video of this. I think the title was like, "A high schooler explains the fourth dimension." When he was just a general explaining, like there's the 1D, the 2D, the 3D, and when you go to the higher Ds and visually explaining, like when I see the crystalline codes, right, and I was explaining to a scientist that it does not look like it belongs in this reality because the dimensions are like layered on top of each other, and they start to look like sacred geometry. And when you get to the higher Ds, instead of having the 3D and then double that, and then all the way to the 12D, like I see, you can't even in your mind really see visually because the D's are laid on top of each other. And the point is what we're able to perceive now, in our state, the technology is kind of behind. So one of the experiments that I've done is it came from when I was putting my daughter to sleep. She's 3, turning 4 now, and I used to turn on the white noise machine. When I was putting her to sleep, I was laying down right next to her, and as she was falling asleep, through that white noise, I used to hear, it was wild, I used to hear voices, but that's just general because I'm a medium, conversation, old horns, like automobiles, honking, and traffic. The experiment is take white noise, set it at a place that you feel that you've seen an apparition, it's very historic, it's old, or kind of just anywhere, but that's more likely to have the evidence, right? If you put it somewhere where you feel like there's an energy apparition, an historic place, set it and have a recorder. Could be your phone, it doesn't matter, put it right next to it, okay? And just record it for 5, 10, 20, whatever time you got, at least after you're done recording it, amplify the sound for at least 3 times to pick up on the noises in the background. And now, even, ghost hunters have done this. This is nothing new. But the difference is they never use white noise or pink or blue or black noise in the background. What I've realized that if you have the white noise in the background, the static, it helps hear the noise better. Sounds. And try this experiment. I'm telling you, tell me what you find because you will be surprised.
I definitely know
And
that
I
there's
have.
been multiple occasions where I've been filming tarot readings here in the studio and have caught stuff on camera, and I release them as shorts. You can check them out. Anytime I catch spirit on camera, I release it to get it out there to people. But I mean, I've had everything from audio interference, like serious audio interference talking back at me, to my lights being knocked over when I'm alone in a room. So anytime I catch something like that on camera, I release it out there for people to take a look at it. But it's real hard online nowadays. Everything is easily fakeable, so people don't believe what they see, even if you've caught something genuine on camera. I mean, it's unless you have like clinical conditions for experimentation, it's like anything that you catch on camera is people aren't going to believe it anyway. So I think that's an interesting experiment to run, but I think for it to have the kind of weight or validity that we really want it to, it would have to be conducted under clinical conditions and in multiple locations, multiple clinical conditions would have to confirm that that's the case.
Yeah. But what makes me question when you say that, Kat, I just want to say is like, how come, because I haven't seen it personally, how come there hasn't been any group of scientists that showed up to a haunted place other than ghost hunters, okay? And they've heard it how many years? They haven't showed up to a place. Let's say that people have said, like hundreds of people have said that it's haunted. Let's say some old hospital that's abandoned. How come they haven't shown up and have their testing, their equipment? It's possible. How come
Yeah,
they haven't done
they
that?
have in certain instances. I know of a couple of instances they've done that at a place called Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know if you're familiar with this site, but it's here in the United States, where there was actually so much weird activity happening out at Skinwalker Ranch that they really did put together a team of like top scientists to go out and move out there with their equipment and all of their stuff. You should look that up and check it
Oh,
out. They do have documentaries out there or even YouTube videos that are covering like the results that were found at Skinwalker Ranch. It's difficult to replicate or catch on camera when it's happening. So even when you have like instances of it caught, it's not like it happens like clockwork every third Tuesday and they catch it all the time. It's
yeah.
You're catching it when it's randomly happening and they can prove that they don't have any explanation as to why it's happening, but they can't replicate what's happening or show what's going on. So there's not anything that's actually testable about it because it doesn't happen with enough frequency for them to be able to consistently test and figure out what's going on. It's kind of the same thing with
Yeah.
UFO activity, is that they can show. I mean, they've got it on cameras, they've got it on jet radar, they've got it on they've got pilots. These are not crazy people, these are professionals. They have all of the evidence that something is taking place, but it's never happening for long enough or consistently enough for anybody to study it or show what the phenomena actually is. But
Yeah.
they have sent teams of scientists out to go examine phenomena, and they can show that
Yeah.
there's something going on. They just don't know what it is.
You know what that makes me think of? It's like there's this device, and it's like when you see the aura, and I don't know what it's called. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of it, but there's just one where somebody could sit and they take a picture, and they actually see the colors around them. And I was thinking, well, that's interesting. What if we use a device like that, but to measure maybe, like, let's say there's a place that is has a lot of apparitions, or you may mentioning that a ranch. I don't know if they use that or not. And then when you actually set it up at a place or room or a space that's very haunted and you see the energies passing by, why not set up that camera where it takes pictures every whatever often, or if they see the orb and they start taking pictures, you actually see maybe the silhouette. Research that orb that it's passing by with infrared, to develop that technology better.
I think there's a lot of potential in working with the technology for reading electromagnetic patterns in the brain is actually becoming a lot more sophisticated and a lot more interesting as well. They're working on right now, they've got prototypes of devices that can take the electromagnetic patterns that they're receiving from the brain activity and reconstruct vague images out of it so they can take what you're imagining and display it. And the hope is that they'll be able to take what you're dreaming and display it so that they can get more insight into dreaming and what dreams actually are. And I think once that technology develops further, you may be able to use something like that in order to also prove and test things like astral projection. Like when you project out of your body, you're still connected to the body, and so the brain is still responding to the stimulus. So I think they may be able to use devices like this in the future in order to be able to take what's being seen and witnessed and have some actual evidence that that's what's being seen and witnessed because it's coming up on the screen, and be able to verify some things in that way, that consciousness is actually expandable and it's not necessarily trapped in the body, that things like remote viewing and astral projection are real things. And if they can get that technology to work and use it in that function, people who are able, like I am, to move between dimensions, you may be able to actually get like use people's consciousness as a camcorder to get a real look at what's going on in some of these other realms, as we tend to call them, or other dimensions.
It made me think of this experiment they did on media, where when they were doing a reading, they actually put this, cap on their head, and they were looking at the brain waves, right? So supposedly what they said on both of the media, they go into like a theta state, like they go into like a sleep state when they're giving a reading or challenge. And that's what happens to me. I realize that because when I have like a energy coming in, I go blank. And I don't know why, how that works. How come I do and some others don't? There's so many questions, right? So they go into the alpha, or just let's just put between state, the sleep state, and that's where they receive the information. It's so interesting. And imagine, Kat, somebody who's like, let's say you, and having that cap on you, and even having the devices hooked up to your heart, monitor, and maybe the what do you call it, electromagnetic screen, so they could actually see what happens to you. All these things they can kind of do, and testing, that'd be super interesting.
Rudimentary data can be collected just between people who have the various abilities, like if, let's say, you and I were just keeping a field journal and running some basic experiments, right? Like you mentioned before, like anytime I'm thinking heavily of you and associating an emotion to it, you can keep a journal and say, and write down times, and I can write down times. We could compare data. We could also work on reaching out to you in a dream state. Like if I was astral projecting, can I get to you and tell you what you were doing? You know what I mean? And I think you can take some of those results and do individual experiments, but outside of clinical conditions is going to be scrutinized, right? Because you and I are buddies. Who's to say that we didn't make things up?
This is the thing I've noticed in my life, and I want to do the experiment with you, okay? Maybe we could set up next week. So what happens is when somebody thinks of me intensively, it has to be intense emotion. It could be love or hate or anything in between, but it has to be intense. The more intense the emotion, the more I'm on point with knowing that they're actually thinking of me, and sometimes I could catch on to what, which is crazy. And I definitely want to do this experiment with you. Because I've done it with friends when I was younger, and everybody's gotten that. Where suddenly, like, you're thinking of somebody, and suddenly you call them or you message them, like, oh my god, I was just thinking about you. And this is what I've done to friends when I was younger, so I know that this is real, this is true, and we're definitely going to do this experiment. But I just want to say, with a disclaimer, when the emotion is not as intense, you can't pick up on the feeling of somebody's thinking of you, but the more intense it is, you could actually know who it is and what they're actually thinking. Because when you pick up on the emotions, you feel if it's good or bad.
I think it's
Well,
interesting. I
good
think
guess?
one of the things that they ran into trouble with when they were originally testing out psychic abilities, because they've ran experiments on this before. But I think one of the things they ran into trouble with is the experiments were all designed by scientists, not by psychics. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, the psychic abilities do run on emotional currents, like you're saying. What you pick up on is the feelings and impressions from the situation, and then you can draw things from that. But if you're going to run an experiment where I'm sitting in a room staring at a picture of a star on a card that I don't feel anything about this star, like that's going to have a much spottier and less consistent result than it would if you were running the experiment with something that you actually cared about, like a picture of your child or something. If that was the case and there was a stronger emotional connection to what you were looking at and thinking about, that's a much easier current to pick up on. But I think all of the original
Yeah.
experimentation that was done about it was designed by people who couldn't themselves do it. And so the experiments weren't designed around successful theories. They weren't designed in a way that would work well.
When, let's say you're thinking of somebody, right? And you could, even the viewers could do this for their own little experiment, just for fun, and even comment back if they, had any kind of results. It's like, it's not so much just staring at the picture of the person, feeling the emotion. It could be like even creating scenes. That's what I did to connect with the person. Because when you create a scene and I'm included in it, it's giving that emotion to me, just love or good feelings
Mm.
about whatever situations, and and I pick up on it. I really do, and I'm sure others have too. No doubt about it. I think everybody has done this at least minimum once in their life, if not like a handful of times.
I think there's a lot of things that as the technology improves, they should be able to start to sense some differences in things. One of the big things that is challenging to get around is that from a scientific perspective, they're operating on the basis or the thought process that the the physical creates consciousness, right? You are a product of electromagnetic patterns in your brain. Um, they've never been able to prove the existence of a soul, for lack of a better word, or of a pattern of consciousness that exists beyond or outside of the activity that they're picking up on their monitors inside the brain, right? And so everything that they're basing their experimentation and their theories and their train of thought on is based on that premise, rather than exploring what if that premise is not correct. When we base what we know on an assumption, then we start going down a train of thought that's not leading us anywhere useful. And I think it would be useful to start thinking about things the other way around. Like, what if consciousness did exist before the body did? As we do spiritually believe, right? That we're way older than this lifetime, and we will way outlive this lifetime. If you come at it from that perspective, then how would you prove that? What things would that mean? What trains of thought can come from that? Sometimes you just need
Yeah.
people to have an open mind and looking at things in a little bit of a different way to get to further something.
Like when you have somebody who's so rigid in their scientific, there's a balance of going, okay, I'm a scientist, I need my facts, I need my proof, I need this evidence, and I absolutely agree. But when they're so rigid and they can't even go on the other end and go, okay, I see there's a lot of spirituality in their evidence and they've been talking about this, and they have to be flexible and open enough to even kind of merge the two, going, okay, like you said, let's go backwards, let's look at these theories people are saying, and we have to collaborate with these scientists, or these minds who are open enough to understand and be, and understand that that's the path to go.
Being a little bit more flexible in what we think about things may open up new avenues of scientific study. We if we know anything for sure as humans, it's that we've definitely been wrong in the past, you know, and looking at things differently and thinking about things differently has always been the doorway to furthering progress.
There's so many psychics and mediums, let's just stick with that, who mention about spirits and or about the deceased to relatives and loved ones, and they're so on point. And yes, some of them could research this stuff, but you've heard so many times, and me personally saying, I cannot research this stuff, and other ones you can't. So I mean, that alone, saying, okay, well, I mean, it's been like hundreds, thousands of years people have been doing this, so why not do more research on that?
I do think that there should be ways to take certain things that are theories and apply them. Like, there's also, and again, God, you'll have to forgive me. I don't know what this stuff is called. Again, I'm not a science expert or anything, but I think it's Schrodinger who came up with a collapsible waves and probabilities, like Schrodinger's cat in the box, and about probabilities and how collapsible waves. And I was thinking about that and remembering that when I get premonitions or predictions or information like that coming through, I remember standing next to a lady in a yoga studio. It was under construction. It was her studio and she was still building it. And she was talking to me about the various things she was planning on doing in her entry area, and standing next to her. And the more excited she got about talking about it, I started hearing, like audibly hearing running water in the room. And I looked at her and I said, do you have like a water feature, like a fountain or something going in? And she was like, oh yes, there's going to be this fountain right here. And I already have it picked out and I love it so much. And I remember thinking to myself that I think the closer something gets to happening, the closer it's become probable. Like, this woman had plainly put a lot of thought into this fountain. She loved it. She knew the one she wanted. There was a lot of momentum behind that fountain. And because it was coming, the waves were collapsing, it was coming closer to actually physically happening, I was able to actually audibly hear it in the room. And I think there's something to that, is the closer something, the shorter the waveforms become, the closer something gets to actually physically manifesting, actually happening, the easier it is to hone in on those probabilities and make those predictions.
I love that you mentioned that, because the more that you put your energy and thoughts into whatever it is, the closer it comes to you, into your reality.
Yeah.
Anything, from anything, including the bad. So if you think you're gonna be sick or whatever, but oh my God, I think I'm gonna get this because it's genetic, you're bringing it closer to you. The probability. There was this. I'm not gonna quote even the name of the experiment. It was an actual experiment. That when you have like particles, right, and they're being shot out into like this space that they have designed, that generally speaking, what direction it's going to go in, but they have no clue as to exactly where they would land. And this is a probability case of how come intuitives could spot on these things, because they're catching on, and so you have to merge the two of going, there is a probability, but the where is how come psychic, can catch on and understand what it is. So there's that missing link.
And I think if you could actually hone in and figure out how to experiment along those lines, you could be close to proving, like, law of attraction. Or, like you said, what you think about or what you're putting your momentum into, you're actually attracting to yourself. Which does, if it's provable, show that consciousness is creating their own experience. And so I think there's a lot of possibility there. But the key is making the connection between the scientific theories and concepts and what we experience.
I was in high school, and my photography professor decided to do this experiment with us. He had these colored balls, these soft colored balls in a bag. He said, I'm going to play a test with you. I'm going to get a blindfold, and I'm going to sit somebody in front of the chair, and I'm going to pick a ball, and you're going to use your intuitive senses to figure out what color it is. I remember these two students who went ahead of me, and some they got right. I think maybe it depends, 1 out of 3. I was the last one to go, and every single ball that I picked out, and I closed my eyes, and he gave me time, and like maybe just a minute or two, and he put the ball in my hand, and I had the black blindfold on, and I could actually feel the color. So whenever I had the color in my hand, I actually had flashes of things of that color, like yellow for banana or the sun or something. I'll never forget that. And I was like, what the heck?
I really
Like,
think
how would I
that
know this?
now, because a lot of the studies and the stuff they did about it are older studies. And I really think that nowadays there are a lot more people to sample size from. Like with the invention of the internet, it's so much easier to reach out to the world at large and say, "Hey, do you have these kinds of abilities? We're conducting a study." And far more people know about it now because of the spread of information, so they were able to hone and develop their abilities, right? So you have, I think, a bigger sample size of people to work with. And I also think that if you allowed experimentation that was informed by mediums, by astral projectors, by people who do this, you may get better results. And I think you have better technology nowadays for studying those results or capturing those results. And you have a much bigger sample size of people to pool from to show, you're not working with 10 people, you could be working with thousands of people in locations all over the world.
Exactly, and that's what I would love to do one day. That is my mission. I've been posting it on my other site, Confessions of a Quantum Channeler. I really want to collaborate more with scientists just about what can we do, even think of the experiments, just even talking about it. And then, somebody one day could fund us, or we could find the fundings ourselves somehow, all this stuff. But the more we talk about it, the more we get closer to it, and that's my mission.
Yeah, we're
Because
generating
I don't want
momentum
to just
about it right
talk about
now.
it.
Let us know in the
Yeah,
comments if you
and
want
we're
to see
gonna do the
funding
experiment.
for psychic experimentation and for some broader experimentation and proof-based science around psychic abilities and mediumship. I will link Joanna's channel, Confessions of a Quantum Channeler, in the description as always, and I'll link my other channel, Unraveling the Unexplained, too. I don't think I've ever done that before. Thank you for being here. Like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff, and we will see you next time on Spirituality.